All right, guys, welcome to the Parley. Today we got a special guest, Mr. Todd Fossey. He's the co-founder, or he actually is the founder of IDS. I'm going to welcome him in real quick. Todd, welcome to the Parley. Real People Will Talk.
Thanks for having me here, Mark. Hey, I'm loving this intro music, man. It's got some groove.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that, man. So listen,
Right
I've been watching.
Keep that playing.
You like it? Yeah, it's gonna. I'll let it play. I'll let it rock for you. So,
all right.
One of the things I like the most about when I first caught your attention, I mean, friends, our mutual friend Paulo, he showed me, I saw some clips from working with you, and I was like, man, who's this guy? The one thing that I noticed that really resonated with me was your creed there, your motto: don't be a gunfighter, be a fighter with a gun.
Yeah, man.
And I'm a noob when it comes to guns, but I had that epiphany with regards to like the stick fighting. I used to just think about the stick, and then I wasn't using my other tools. And when that moment came where I just started using my other tools, it was like a whole new world. Please just let me know how you came with that and how that discovery happened.
Yeah, brother. Well, it's not a sexy answer. Hey, Mark, you can kill that music now because it's so good. Now it's distracting me, and I want to get my group on instead of focus on our conversation.
No worries, buddy. No
So
worries.
that works for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it, though. It's good stuff. It's not a sexy answer. The answer actually came from data sets. And I'm a certified FSI certified force science analyst. So that means I can be an expert in use of force cases and go in as an expert witness. And I have a background in science. I have a background in behavioral sciences. And so the approach that I take toward training, particularly when it comes to self-defense and self-defense with a firearm especially, is really based on raw data sets, right? And so what I've done is I've taken the averages and the meta-analysis of multiple data sets, and those have helped to paint a picture of how violence actually occurs. I know a lot of people have a tendency to feel like the use of firearm is nothing but a fantasy. And I think the reason why people view that is because that's how social media tends to portray it. That's how Hollywood tends to portray it. That's how video games tend to portray it. And the way that the training community works in the firearms training world is not representative in its training design of how violence actually occurs. If you take a look at what the data says, how violence actually occurs, almost all of it, not exclusively, but almost all of it is happening at contact distance. So as opposed to being dependent on a firearm that you're using at distance because it is a lethal distance weapon, now we want to take a look at what the data says. And the data says that you shouldn't just be a gunfighter, but that you should actually be a fighter with a gun. In other words, you should know how to handle yourself in the full spectrum of force, from the simplest type of assault or battery all the way up to the highest levels of aggravated assaults. And even the majority of aggravated assaults are happening at contact distance. So just to give the audience just a quick breakdown of that, if that's okay, I'll just give a quick breakdown.
Absolutely.
80% of assaults are simple assaults in battery that are happening at contact distance, where that means that you're reasonably in immediate fear of bodily harm. It means you're going to make a full recovery, you're going to get banged and bruised and maybe cut up a little bit, but you're going to make a full recovery, and it's going to be fairly rapid or almost an immediate recovery. So in order to use force, we have to use the same level of force that's coming against us. And 80% of those assaults are simple assaults happening at contact distance. However, that can escalate very quickly. If that person's just throwing punches at you, they're grabbing you in the clinch, they're throwing you up against a wall, and they see or feel that you have a weapon on, the research shows that they have a tendency to fixate on that weapon. One, a predatory instinct tends to kick in where they want to take that weapon from you, or they want to take that weapon from you to use it on you, or they don't want you to use your weapon on them. And so to be able to retain that weapon and access that weapon in a way that is measured and appropriate to the circumstance is really, really critical. And be able to handle yourself at all of those distances and all those different types of force that are coming at you is absolutely critical. Then if we take a look at aggravated assaults, where someone is reasonably in immediate fear of substantial bodily harm or great bodily harm or death, the overwhelming majority of those, even in the United States, is going to be what's called personal weapons, where people are taking fists and feet and elbows and chokes, and they're taking that to an extreme level of excessive force. Think about that. And then the next after that is going to be a blunt force weapon, like hammers are most common, screwdrivers, and then, sticks, things of that nature. And then after that, it's edged weapons. Okay, so we take a look at this full spectrum, and then way down the list in the United States is the firearm. The firearms training world kind of has set up this cognitive illusion where people are going around getting into gunfights all the time. Like there's these duels at high noon and everyone's getting into shootouts. And in the reality, if you remove gang on gang warfare, those incidents are extremely rare. So that's the reason, that's the non-sexy reason why we say don't be a gunfighter, be a fighter with a gun. And then even when we do have the firearm, we're not just shooting static, poking holes in paper in a way that is, this static generic marksmanship. We still need to apply the principles of winning the fight. And so even when we have our weapon in our hand and we're using it, that's why we say don't be a gunfighter, instead be a fighter with a gun. In other words, the emphasis, the roles and the emphasis of the principles are actually reversed.
That's fascinating. With regards to, taking that into consideration, how quick did you come to realize that, the jiu-jitsu or some form of grappling was going to play an integral role in that area?
Yeah. It was really when I started taking a look at the hard data, and the hard data showed that in almost all violent crimes that are happening at contact distance, one, in the simple assaults, there's usually some type of a scramble that happens in the clinch, right? And then the others are happening at contact distance also. And so then I started taking a look at more data sets and case reports that were suggesting that about a third of those encounters end up on the ground, right? And now we're on dangerous surfaces, and there's a 56% chance of more than one attacker. And so I started to realize very quickly, listen, if we're going to prioritize this in the right way, according to what the data is telling us, then we need to learn to dominate at those distances and modify grappling. So for example, on our feet, Greco-Roman wrestling is really the base because it fits in so well, but we have to modify it. Because the context dictates the strategy, and what we call an ecologically dynamic approach to training. So if you think of it as an ecosystem, if you add something to an ecosystem, what happens? It changes the whole ecosystem, right? If you take something away from an ecosystem, it changes the whole ecosystem. Right. And so that's why we realized this through a lot, like 13 years of pressure testing, 13 years of curriculum development, we realized we need to modify Greco for this context, for self-defense, especially in the weapons-based context. And same with grappling. Grappling meaning horizontally on the ground. Vertical for us is wrestling, horizontal is grappling when we're on the ground. We need to modify the principles and the objectives of sport grappling. That's going to be more conducive to a self-defense context.
Now, for somebody who trains in a grappling art such as Greco or whatever type of wrestling, sambo, jiu-jitsu, and they were interested in this kind of thing, what would you say the biggest takeaway or the biggest discovery that they're going to make with regards to translating the firearm in with what they might already know?
I think they're going to be shocked if they really set up their roles as more of a self-defense or defending an attack, at how quickly their weapon can be taken from them and used on them. I think they'll also be very surprised at how quickly they can go to excessive force. The rules are going to be different now, right? And so just because you're on the ground or just because you're entangled and someone's trying to hurt you, that doesn't mean that you are legally justified to use lethal force. It also depends on what type of weapon we're talking about. Are we talking about an edged weapon? Are we talking about a firearm? The decision making can be very different there. But also in terms of submissions, we need to be careful with the submissions also, because one, let's say someone throws a punch at you and you take them down and you break their arm. Well, you used excessive force. They were attempting simple assault and you went to aggravated assault. Yeah. Now he's going to have a prolonged loss or impairment of that arm, right? And also you can provide justification for them to draw a weapon and opportunity to draw a weapon because you're so fixated on finishing that submission. So this is honestly, um, catch wrestling is really what we found to be the most applicable to self-defense, because its emphasis is so big on top position and
Right.
control, where we can utilize ground and pound, we can retain our weapon a little bit more effectively from top and bottom, and access it a little bit more effectively if we need to. But again, it takes time to develop those pathways. And another thing that I would add to your question, Mark, is that I think they would be surprised at the pathways that they're used to taking. Okay, I'm in this position, here's my pathway out, is probably not going to be conducive to retaining and accessing their weapon. So it sounds backward, but a lot of people will say, make sure that you learn grappling first before you learn weapons-based grappling. And I'm going to disagree with that. I'm going to say it's ideal, not need to, but it's ideal to develop those principles with the weapon on you first, so that you don't have to spend the time unlearning and relearning habits, or in the force science world, which are called slips and capture errors or training scars, in a way that's going to be most conducive to the context in which you'll probably be applying it.
I like that, training scars. Well, it makes sense because your primary tool is the firearm, but everything has to supplement to protect and be able to give you the opportunity to use it, or not allow somebody else to attain it, right?
Well, I would say, and I don't mean to be contrary here, but I would say that the firearm or the weapon is not the primary tool. That it's actually the tertiary tool. That it's the last tool. It's the last tool that we go to when we have no other option.
Right.
And
right. I guess
a very low probability that we'll need to have that tool. So the tools are more primary and secondary.
Right. I guess I should have worded that better. What I meant was, like you have to be very conscientious, because if you lose it and it gets used against you, good night. You know what I mean? So your grappling, everything has to be built around protecting that and enforcing that. How beneficial has it been training with Mr. Nelson?
Oh man, as you can, the audience probably knows who you're talking about. You're talking about Greg Nelson. Greg Nelson is my mentor, and it's life-changing, to be honest with you, every time I have the opportunity to be with him, which is a lot, which is multiple times a week. And awesome. Not just spend a lot of time with him in class, but spend a lot of time with him one-on-one. And we spend a lot of time collaborating and researching, developing on the weapons-based side of combatives. And he's changed. He's not only changed my perspective, but he's changed my life in so many ways. He's such an incredible human being, and I'm honored to say also that he calls me his coach. I'm his firearms instructor as well. So it's cool that someone who's at the level that he is sincerely humble to the point, like he's the most teachable person I've ever worked with. But think about that. And so just to approach it with the attitude that he has, and every day for Greg, in every class and every hour, as if it's the first time he's ever done any of this. He has fresh eyes every single time. It's really amazing.
When I watch you guys together, you guys have I don't know you guys well. I don't know you guys, period. But when I watch you guys, I can recognize the chemistry. I can recognize that. And it's really cool to see that, because I know he's got a wealth of knowledge, and you have a wealth of knowledge, and you guys are able to merge that together. I think that's something that most martial artists need to understand, that they should be able to collaborate like that and just be open and sharing and create something that you guys are doing that is like top. For me, I don't see anything else like it, man. Like what I see you guys doing seems to be like cutting edge. And leads me to my next question. How do you stay ahead of the curve? Like, how do you keep yourself from getting stagnant and comfortable and compliant with what you're learning? Do you guys always have something, like you have your curriculum that you're teaching, but in the backgrounds, are you guys constantly looking for ways to refine or better ways, or researching?
It never ends. One, we're always looking to make our curriculum smaller and not bigger. We're looking for the fewest number of solutions to as many problems as possible. I'd rather teach you one thing that will handle 10 problems than 10 things that will handle one. Yeah. It's far more efficient that way. But it's just good, better, best, never let it rest. That's a Greg Nelson saying, right? We're never satisfied. We never will be. So, and it's just the way our minds work. We're always looking to innovate. There's something that we're doing that is less effective than what it can be. And we're always looking to disprove our own theories, our own thesis, to prove that what we've been doing is wrong, that there's a better way to do that. And then just being open-minded and creative at all times and being willing to throw things out and avoiding being attached to any ideas that we may have. It's funny because I don't know how this is going to sound. As you know, I'm pretty outspoken, so I'll just say it the way I see it. I feel like I agree with you. We've been right on. Like we've been on the cutting edge for a long time. Like the things that we do are really leading the industry in terms of how training happens, in particular methodology. But now there are things, we have a whole new level now. Now we can say we're coming out with things and methodologies that no one is even, we've surpassed ourselves now with some of the new things. So we're just always looking to innovate, and we're always looking for great minds that can help to inspire us. And we hope that it's always that way. I hope in 10 years from now, we'll look back at this podcast and say, man, that was some really outdated bullshit. I hope that I do. I hope that that's the case. And I'm embarrassed with some of the things that we say and do,
Well, that just means you grew. That's all. Like, what is the main goal that drives you, Todd? What is the thing that makes you wake up every morning wanting to be better? What drives you?
We're keeping it real, right?
Yeah, because
I'll tell you, man, this is a commission that God has given me. This is a commission that Jesus Christ has given me, man. This is my job. And what are you going to do? God gives you a job. God gives you a commission, and you're going to phone it in. You know what I mean? You're going to bullshit everybody, and you're going to take a half-ass approach to your training. No, this is my purpose. This is my purpose in life. It's why I get out of bed every day. It's what drives me every moment of every day. To not just my number one priority is to preserve the life of my wife, to be honest with you. And then it's other innocent people, and then it's myself. But then after that, it's to really, it's to change the training paradigm, to be honest with you, because I think I know for a fact, because I know a lot about motor learning, and I know a lot about skill acquisition. I know a lot about these things, and it's extremely outdated and dogmatic. And I'm inspired to change that, and not only change how the training occurs, but actually how business takes place. I'd like to see the industry as a whole and the culture as a whole be more open-minded, but be more intellectually honest, less dogmatic, and semantically accurate, and also scientifically literate, and as well as have integrity in business, because there's a lot of slimy bullshit that happens in this industry, and it doesn't have to be that way. And so I'd like to see those things change and have the priorities switch to the preservation of life, and the priority be self-improvement through positive resistance. That's what we call it. And then everybody wins, right? I'm here to serve as opposed to be served, but at the same time, I work really hard, and a lot of people in this industry work really hard, and we do really high risk things. And so we also deserve to be paid well, paid handsomely.
Absolutely.
And have no shame in that, as long as we do it with integrity, right?
Yeah. I mean, the information is invaluable. Like, you can't, heaven forbid you ever had to defend yourself in at that capacity. You can't put a price tag on that kind of knowledge. Do you find a lot of civilians are coming for this type of training now, especially in the U.S.?
Yeah.
And why do you think that
we have an affiliate program where we certify instructors across North America, and now we're in Europe now too. And our primary objective is our training is actually designed for the citizen defender. We have more and more law enforcement and military and security operators that are coming on board and really in a very big way, in a serious way, with what we do. I think that people are starting to realize now that they're on the front lines, that law enforcement is not going to be there to save the day for them. In so many cases, and they're watching the violence out of hand. Violent crime is just parabolic, right? It's all around them at all times.
Crazy.
And so I think they're starting to realize that this is real now, and they need to really get in. And that's another thing we want to change in the firearms world, is the consistency in training. We take a martial arts model to our firearms training, where people are coming to classes all week long, year after year, instead of just once or twice a year. then so people have a different look in their eye now. You know, they're realizing this is more than just a hobby that they can dabble in, and they want to roll their sleeves up and they want to get to work because they want to protect their family.
So what's a typical like week of training like for these guys who sign up? How much of it is spent on range? How much of it is spent in your beautiful training barn that I'd love to visit one day? How does it
open invite?
Oh man, as soon as I can.
Open invite. Come spend time. Stay here with us. I'm serious.
Man, as soon as I can.
We'll go to the academy.
Oh,
that's serious, Mark. Oh, take me
I
up.
would love it.
I'm honored to have you here too.
I would absolutely love that.
Anytime.
Actually, I think. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Question.
What were you gonna say?
Oh no, I was just gonna say, like, I know Greg Nelson is coming down in March. We're hosting him at Combat Arts in Mississauga. It's gonna be my first time actually training with him. So I'm super pumped for that. But yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to make that visit and come train with you.
Yeah, man, for sure. We'll have a lot of fun. So what does a typical training week look like? I would say for the students that come here to IDS headquarters, this might be slightly different than some of our other schools, because IDS headquarters is actually, we tell our students when they come here that you're a guinea pig. This is a lab. And it's all about research and development for us. And so they know that, and they like being a part of that research and development process. They all put in about 5 to 7 hour a week here at IDS HQ. And that's all, not all of it, 95% of that is with an inert weapon with the SIRT laser training pistol integrated with combatives and different forms of scenario work, or what we call randomized scenario-based exercises. 2.5% of that is the same, but now with non-lethal training ammunitions like UTM or simunitions, 2.5%, and then 2.5% is live fire, because live fire is so limiting. And so the things that we can validate at the range with live weapons, we will. But then the approach that we take with our live fire training is also different. It's far more dynamic and representative of how violence actually occurs. So I would say, they're probably putting in anywhere between 5 and 10 hours a week at IDS HQ. But many of them actually, I refer them out. I know that sounds crazy, but I say, hey, you should go to the Minnesota Martial Arts Academy and you should train there too. They know what we do. We're to tell where Integrative Defense Strategies ends and the academy begins, and vice versa, because we have so many members that go back and forth. And Greg is actually an affiliate instructor for us too. So he'll come to our training events and he'll teach at our training events, which is really a huge honor. So I would say they're putting anywhere between 15 to 20 hours in per week.
That's good.
And I put in anywhere between usually 25 to 30 a week. So when I hear law enforcement kind of poo-poo, regular people in their training, I'm like, man, you're putting in 3 hours a year.
Yeah, it's really bad.
15 to 25 hours a week,
It's night and day. Like I do scenario acting for law enforcement and armed guards. Actually, Paulo helped me. Shout out to Paulo. Thank you for that. He helped introduce me to Taylor from Chimera Firearm Training Academy, and
I know Taylor.
I've been helping those guys, and it's been great. Like I'm really getting to learn the law enforcement's side of things on what their training involves with regards to cues and stuff like that, the use of force models. But as a scenario actor too, though, I'm coming at it with some martial arts experience. So at first I was expecting these guys to be a little bit more well-rounded, but some of them are. You could tell the guys that train jiu-jitsu regularly, especially the guys who are doing like Chad Lyman's version of the police jiu-jitsu. But like there's some law enforcement and guards out there, they have no training, and it's very scary to think that they're putting their lives in that, and they're not prepared. They're really not prepared. They're just relying on their firearm.
What I would like the audience to hear me say this, because things get misconstrued often. Well, I train law enforcement a lot, I really do. And I'm critical of law enforcement training, and I'm critical of it not because I want to disparage them, but because I care. If we don't have people who are speaking out about what the problems are there, then things aren't going to change at all. 100%. And so I care too much. I'm not going to do that profession the disservice of not speaking honestly about what I see.
It's valid. It's a valid point. Why do you think someone who's in that position would not train more?
That's a complicated answer. I think there's a culture. I've noticed the culture tends to be everywhere around the world, and I'm not sure where that started. There's usually a point of origin of that. There's a lot of political influences there, meaning like usually a person who ends up getting into a position of decision making, they're usually more of an administrator type, right? They're less of a use of force type, and they're making decisions in areas that they don't really have a natural knack for. Also, people through their seniority tend to end up in positions, or they're motivated by an increase in pay. They're motivated by external things. A lot of them are. For whatever reason, throughout my whole career, I've been almost the only non-law enforcement in training with law enforcement. So I'm around those guys a lot as a student too. So I've learned a lot about it, and most of all of them would agree with what I'm saying. But also, to be fair, their job is very difficult, and it's draining mentally, emotionally, and physically. And so I get it. The last thing they want to do is train when they're out there on the street. But I don't think that's a good excuse.
No, I think they need to invest in it, because at the end of the day, they're investing in themselves and their lives and the ability to do their job better so that they can help people better. So I like
make better decisions.
Yeah, because for me, it's like it's the not even understanding just how, like, for example, pulling a blade on some guys, like a training blade during scenarios. Some of them they don't even know basic principles of covering vitals, and it's just like this like gross motor panic kind of, and it's very scary. It's very scary, and it's once they've kind of like I had one officer. He was just like, you could tell it sparked a light in his head after the scenario was over. He was just like, man, I would have got stabbed like 6 times. Like you could tell it kind of like put a little bit of fear in him and made him say like, I want to train more. When you first have cops or law enforcement come train with you, I'm sure you get that effect quite a bit. What's the first thing that they come to realize, like the holy shit moment with you, of how uneducated they are?
Yeah, I mean, they do, and I think that's important, because they're in that Dunning-Kruger effect before that, where they have an illusory superiority. They believe that they can do more than what they can actually do, and then the other part of Dunning-Kruger effect is they have what's called a metacognitive inability to recognize it. So they don't even know what they never recognize. They think they can do more than what they can do, and they don't know it. And so they move from this unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence. They finally realize, okay, they're a small piece, right? Yeah. A small piece of it. They finally start to realize, oh man, they finally start to realize that they don't know what they don't know.
I mean, but that's the first step. That's an important first step.
And when we all go through, that's the point. We're constantly want to challenge ourselves and find out what we don't know and what we thought we knew. And what's interesting is that answer is going to be different for everyone. Like what works for one person may not work for another person. So to find something that's going to work best for you, something that's going to work best for your circumstances, for your attributes, is going to be wildly important, as opposed to taking this kind of cookie cutter, one size fits all approach to everything, which is just the variables in violence are not repeatable, and there are no two people that are the same. We're not robots stamped out in a factory, right?
Question for you: when you're teaching, like say you're teaching a principle, or you're teaching a certain thing with your group, like you were saying, just to reference, you were saying it's not all going to work for everybody the same way. Are you watching very hard to how they kind of take in the information, and if you see them struggling, at what point do you try to like help clean that particular thing up, or say this is not going to work for you, here, try this instead? What's that balance like?
Well, that's the art of teaching, right? I believe. Otherwise, we're just presenting information. There's a big difference between being a presenter and being a big, huge difference. And most people don't realize that.
No,
they think, oh, I showed you something, so you didn't teach them. But first of all, I would say this: I want them to struggle. they'll learn it more effectively. They'll learn it more quickly and more deeply when they struggle. The more that they fail, the more that they struggle, the more effective the training will be. And I know for a fact, as a scientific fact, you know this about me, Mark, I obsess over motor learning. Like I read about it and study about it and have mentors and seek out the top experts in the world. And have been since I was 10 years old, and I did it professionally for over 20 years as a motor learning and human performance coach. So I have a deep background in this and the scientific side of it too. I want them to struggle with it. And most people try to set people up to succeed. And that's what gives them the false sense of confidence. I actually want to set them up to fail, but in the right way. And I also am not looking for perfection in the first early repetitions. Quite the opposite. I want it to be sloppy. We call it train ugly. Too many people are training to look good in practice. Yeah. And that way that's not going to transfer to application, you see. So the philosophy that I take is that of a sculptor. And at first I'm just knocking off the huge chunks, and then slowly we start to, do a little bit more sculpting and refining, and then we rinse and we polish with time. And so that's a process. Right. And then we teach them to be their own sculptor. Now, I'm not the one doing the sculpting anymore. I'm just helping to guide them. And they're doing mostly self-learning and being their own sculptor. And so that's kind of the approach. And then attributes and specific things. And then we can take a look at, as we're going, how can we adapt the sculpting process to this individual? Like sometimes you'll get a piece of granite, right? And it's super hard. And other times it'll be a little bit softer, and sometimes you get a huge piece of granite, sometimes you get a small one. And so you have to work with what you have. So that's just how I see it. There are no two people or circumstances are the same. And same when we're training. We call it way finding, where we allow students to find their own way instead of me giving them the way. That's right. Beautiful. And then we allow our students to experience repetition without repetition. So there are no routines that are the same. And that forces them to find their way. And the research shows that deepens and accelerates their learning, and that improves their performance.
Man, that's a fantastic way to look at it, man, because now you're holding the student accountable to do their own research. And once they do that, they really are making it their own. They're invested now. And once they're invested, they're going to hit the ground running. That's a very smart, very well articulated approach. And you're right. Like if they do not have the confidence in that pressure testing, they won't trust their abilities, and then they'll just crumble at the first. When things get hard and they get tired, they're gonna crumble. That's right. They don't know how to. How do you deal with?
They don't know how to adapt, and they don't know how to adapt and deal with adversity. You're denying the student the opportunity to FSO, right? To figure shit out. You're denying them that opportunity. So think about it like this. This is how I like to, another way I like to put it. This is how the industry tends to do things, because they want students to get a high, right? They want students to feel like they're Jason Bourne and shit, right? Yeah. Yeah. So think about it like this, like they don't know what math is. And then you try to explain to them what math is. And then you teach them what the number 2 is. And then you teach them what a sign, and then you teach them what the number 2 is. And then you teach them what an equal, and you teach them number 4. And they have that equation over and over again. 2 + 2 = 4. 2 + 2 = 4. 2 + 2 = 4. And then they're repeating the equation, the problem and the solution that you gave them. One problem, an easy one, and one solution, an easy solution, over and over and over again, and one approach to that solution. While there are many approaches to that equation, and now they think they know how to do math. And then they go out into reality and they realize that what happens is, in reality, is that now it's not simple, addition, that they have to solve a super complex mathematical problem, right? That's like calculus, but now the variables are changing in real time, and sometimes there aren't even numbers there. Sometimes they're colors and shapes and shit they've never seen or heard of before, and they still have to solve that problem. So teaching students how to solve the problem and couple the motor learning to the context helps them what we call self-organize. And after a while, they learn what works. But the challenge is that there's a high rate of failure to do it. And most people don't want that. They want to go to a place that's going to blow smoke ass and lead them to believe that they can do things that they can't do. So they're like, well, I'll just go there because it makes me gives me a false confidence. I'm like, well, go there then. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in saving your life. I don't want to throw you in a situation that's going to destroy your confidence. I want them to have a healthy sense of reality and a healthy sense of confidence at the same time, a little bit of both.
When you have somebody that comes and does this training and this is not something that they're used to, right? And they start getting into the nitty gritty. Do you have people that just kind of like, they totally shatter what they thought they were able to do and just want to opt out? And how do you
almost every time?
So how do you deal with that? Because that's very important. I don't think people realize, right? Because the thing with me is like, I'm willing to put myself out on the line and learn something new and be vulnerable, but I can only do that to somebody. I can only do that with somebody who I respect and know or believe at least believe that they have my best interests at hand. How do you do that? How do you gain that confidence?
Here's how I approach it. But my approach isn't for everybody. I want to say, okay, so this is what my approach. I'm not here to impose my approach on anybody else, or anything that I say, for that matter. Challenge everything that I say. That's important. One, I think it's important that I let students know that I fail, and I'm not afraid to fail in front of my students. That helps to create an environment where vulnerability is encouraged. And you've probably seen, Mark, like I will publicly, like I'll go to the range and I'll push the live button. I'll go Facebook Live. I'll roll against a 10-time world champion who's trying to get my gun, and I'll go Facebook Live. You've probably seen it, right? I'll go against someone who's got 10 fights in the UFC, and I'll go Facebook Live while they're trying to get my gun. You know, I'll go against Greg Nelson, and these guys know how to get my gun or whatever when I'm sparring with these guys, because I want to encourage failure. We call it train ugly, right? I want to encourage failure as fast as I possibly can, because I know that the more I fail, the more effective the teacher and commissioner as a person who develops curriculum. So when they see me fail and they see how I handle failure, now that gives them permission to do the same. And then I want to, when they see other students fail, I want to be encouraging of that failure. Now, we don't want to stay in that. Like, we want to remediate, we want to refine, we want to use it as a feedback opportunity, right? And so that encourages them to do it. And then at that point, if they realize that that's what the culture is, and then they still don't want to go through that, then we don't want them to go through it either. Like, they're not in the right place, right? They need to go to a place that's going to give them what they want instead of what they need. And that means they're not a fit for the chemistry of what we're doing here. It doesn't mean that we always come back if they feel like they've changed their mind, but we want people to, again, this isn't for everyone. We want people to feel like, no, that's what you can't. This is what I want to do, and there's nothing that you can do to stop me. I don't care how many times I fail. I don't care how embarrassed I am. I need to do this. That's what we want. We want those people who are willing to put them first. And unfortunately, the industry doesn't want to do that. They want to present themselves as this knight in shining armor, and everything they do is perfect with super highly produced videos, and this is how fucking good they are. And I'm like, fuck you, man. Fuck off. I've never even seen you do a live go, man. I've never even seen you go live versus Real Resistance versus anybody, ever. Fuck you and your 50 edits to get that one take. You're creating a, you know what I'm saying, dude? You're creating this false sense of reality that people can never meet, ever. And neither can they.
And it distorts expectations, it distorts people, it distorts people's ability, and it gets people into a lot of trouble. You know, I see a lot of that with knife defense and stuff like that. And I know people, and one of the people I'm talking about, you're gonna love to hear his story. I'm not gonna spoil it, but this guy had to really use his training to, stop a loved one from being killed.
Save his life.
It's not a joke, it's not something to romanticize and try to look how I am. It's not a fucking joke. How important is reinforcing this, Todd, when you do? Because I watch.
I watch barbecue here.
Oh yeah, you say whatever you want, bro. This is my fucking show.
Sorry, Mark, I lost your audio there for a second.
I said you can say whatever you like there, man.
I lost your audio there for a second, buddy.
Hear me? Can you hear me now?
Oh, right on. Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. So one thing I really, really like that you do, I think is really important, and probably how you reinforce this kind of talk about failure and getting over failure is I think it's really brilliant. I love the way you do it, is your debriefs. Your debriefs after your training. How vital is that for your students and yourself?
It's such a big deal. I'll tell you this. Yeah, for myself, whenever I do live goes, some of you maybe have seen me do this when I go live. Even during the roll, if you have a good training partner, they'll be cool about this, right? Even during the roll or while we're training, I'll stop in the middle when a mistake is happening. I'm like, hey, you know, what did you do there, right? Can we do that again? Will you do that again? How do you think I should handle this? You know, it's alive. It's alive. The training is alive. It's about getting better. It's not about winning all the time. There's a time and a place to try to win. There's a time, but most of it's about learning over winning. And so that's going to require failure. And then after my training, with every round that I do, I'm going to stop and do a debrief for 2-3 minutes. I'm going to talk through things, going to talk through decision making, because two things. It helps me replay what happened, and it helps me get feedback from who I'm training with on how I might deal with it more effectively. But it also helps me to articulate my decision making, because if I have to use force, that means I'm going to have to make a statement, a written statement. And that helps me to practice making that statement, which is a part of my defense. My legal defense is a part of my defense. And then on the student side of things, we always do debriefs at the end of class, or when we're working on something. We'll stop and we'll do a debrief, and I'll say, hey, where are you guys at with this? What did you think? What was that like? What were your observations? What did you learn from yourself? What did you learn from watching others? And so the primary reason that we do that is, one, I'm learning from my students and what their experience was like from them, not from me. But also, the research shows that when you do a debrief, it helps to accelerate and deepen their understanding of what they're doing. It's called consolidation in neuroscience. So the neural nets get reinforced with what they were doing. And there's another neurological process called synaptic pruning, where the mind figures out what it doesn't need, so they can throw things out and just start to prune and refine the learning. So it's a really critical part of it, the after action review or debrief. And those are some of the reasons why we do that. Great question. Thank you for asking.
When you do that, do you do you ever take other than mental note, but do you ever actually write down what the concerns were, or what the common, because I do this for sparring. When my students spar, at the end of the sparring, we'll sit down while everybody's taking their gear off. I'm like, okay, guys, I go around the room. I was like, what did you find was the hardest thing for you to deal with today? And who was it against, and why? And what did you find the problem was? And then when they tell me what these problems are, by next class, I've already constructed drills to address that. Is that something that you do as well?
Exactly. Yeah, I have a whiteboard, and I've got whiteboards all around. So I'll jot those notes down. I'll jot those notes down on the whiteboard, and I'm constantly taking mental notes, and then I'll transfer those things over to my laptop. I'm all into like outlines and spreadsheets and all this geeky shit. And so you start to see patterns emerge, and that, right. And then the patterns tell you the approaches that are best for me to take and my students.
Yeah, I think that's no, your debriefs, I really enjoyed listening to that. And another thing too I liked is how well you broke down, not just because I've watched a ton of videos and I've worked with enough people where they talk about, for self-defense, when somebody's an aggressor, you need to look for certain cues and but it's the way you broke down and explained why those cues are happening. Like, for example, the thing I like the most, and I've known this myself, but I couldn't articulate it the way you did, and it was making them show their hands. For the people listening, can you just briefly touch on that, because I think that's very important information.
Yeah. So what Mark's talking about is something that we teach, right? We don't just teach kicking and punching and shooting and shit, right? Like, we teach how violence occurs, the psychology of violence, the psychology of violent criminals, and the patterns of violence, so that our students could more effectively recognize those patterns and what we call the 5 stages of violent crime and the 5 stages of deterrence. And so what Mark is talking about, there's 2 stages in there. One is called the engagement and disengagement stage, and the other one is called the positioning and deterrent stage. So when a violent criminal, if we have the luxury to have things unfold more slowly over time, but the audience should know that the majority of violent crimes are actually ambushes, where the violence is really concealed to the last possible moment, and then they're on you before you even recognize what happened. That way, the criminal has the fantasy element of surprise. That's why we need to train at the level of reflex, because by the time we think about it, it's probably too late. But there are several violent crimes where things sort of unfold in stages. And one of them is when the violent criminal is attempting to position themselves to you and they're trying to engage you in some way, verbally or non-verbally. They're attempting to engage. And so what we're doing during that time is we're disengaging with them verbally and non-verbally. And what happens with most violent criminals fall into the category that's called the antisocial personality disorders. Doesn't mean they don't like to hang out with people. It's a kind of a play on words, but they might not like to hang out with people. I don't know. But what that means is they fall into the category of the psychopath, the sociopath, or the malignant narcissist, typically. And one of the characteristics of these personality types is that they lack empathy. Meaning they don't care how they make another person think or feel or what they do to them. They can't think what another person feels. They can't feel another person's pain or joy or anything. And so what happens is with people who have empathy, they practice something called mirroring and matching. So if someone tries to engage you, say in a public way, in a social way, or not, then they attempt to engage you verbally or non-verbally. If a person isn't comfortable with it, they'll typically put up their hands and say something back like, listen, I'm not comfortable with this. Please get away from me. A person who has empathy will do that. They'll mirror and match back. They'll put their hands up and they'll back away and they'll say, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to, impose.
Yeah.
Because they care. They'll cross the street, they'll create space, they'll help the person to feel safe. But a person who does not have empathy won't. They won't mirror and match. They won't be reflective in their behaviors, typically. Not always, but typically they won't be reflective in their behaviors. And so when we see this happening, especially when it comes to managing distance, there's a lot of factors that are involved. When we see this happening, we know something's up. We're forcing that person to show their hand, because when we force them to mirror and match, when we don't, now that's a tell. That's an indicator that this could be something violent. And so we need to start preparing ourselves before that, but we really need to be preparing ourselves into a higher level of readiness at that point.
Yeah, I think that in itself is I think it's brilliant. It's such a simple thing, people hear that and like, oh yeah, that I know it makes sense, but people really don't understand, how important that is. That's what's going to give you a window, like I had a personal experience, Todd, where I was in a nightclub. Right. I was in a nightclub and, something was happening and I should have been smart enough to understand, okay, this is not a good situation. I should not be allowing this person to get close to me. And the person used the environment as a way to coax me in. When you're in a club or a loud spot, people wave and like they lean in like they want to talk to your ear. Well, this son of a bitch fucking bit me in my neck. And it took a second before I realized, like, I was shocked. And there were so many things that I missed. And that's what actually led me to go back and start training, because I was like, what? I didn't even see. I didn't even think. I was so comfortable in my environment and a natural thing. I wasn't looking at all the other cues. And something like that is going to flush them out and make you have time to realize, okay, this is a fucking threat. Most people don't realize they're in trouble. And
that's the engaging.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mark.
No, I was going to say, most people don't. The problem
that's
is
the engaging. Go ahead. Sorry. The delay has us talking over each other.
Yeah.
Sorry. That's the engaging and the positioning that I was talking about. He was engaging you and positioning himself at the same time. And that's what they prey upon. They're predatory, right? They're parasitic. That's their weapon. That's what they're good at. They're masters of manipulation, and they don't care. They'll do whatever they want. They feel entitled to take from you whatever they want to. They'll feel entitled to you to, if they can get over on you, they feel like they're entitled to do it. I mean that in a very literal way. They're parasitic. And there's different types of these personalities. Some are overt, some are covert. We deal with them in our lives all the time, but most people don't know that they're dealing with it. And it's why I spend time talking about it, not even just in the self-defense context, but you might have noticed I post about these things a lot because I'm here to protect people, not only in a violent situation, but at work. They're socialized within their family, so they can recognize these types of personalities and they can learn to cope with them on many different levels. And then there's the deterrence phase. The deterrence phase is when you are now in charge. You are now taking charge of that situation, and you are becoming a very attractive target for them. And so that's going to be important too, because we want to be able to recognize, detect, and deter, these different types of encounters early on, like you said, because that's going to provide a window for us and more opportunities and more options for us and fewer opportunities and options for them. And so what we want to practice doing is not just isolating our punching and kicking skills, but we also want to learn how to couple those skills with our kinetic skills at the same time, because they're interdependent. They work together, right? So it could be verbal commands or nonverbals. Yeah.
Right. Another thing I really like to, I think it's an important message for people to know, and this is very true because I've been on both sides. I've been an asshole and started with people and kind of use my language to kind of coax them into saying something insulting so that I have a reason to hit. And that's, you said there was two things that you have to be careful when you're trying to de-escalate. Can you just touch on that and describe that a little bit for the listeners?
Yeah. Well, I think that de-escalation, the concept of de-escalation gets conflated a lot, used a lot, the term and what that means. I think a lot of people think that means that you are softening things, and that's a method. You can soften your tone, you can soften your language to try to kind of calm things down. That is one method, and it's an effective method used at certain times and in certain ways. But what people need to understand is that the people who fall into this category of the antisocial personality disorders, they understand two things. They understand strength and they understand weakness. And they can perceive de-escalation as weakness, and oftentimes they do. And they see that as an opportunity for them to force you to submit to them. So to us, there's a big difference between deterrence and de-escalation. Okay. And deterrence, like, I am in charge. I am telling you that you're going to back away from me and you're going to do it now. I'm telling you that the police are on the way, and I'm telling you that here's are my boundaries and you will not cross these boundaries or there will be consequences. And the de-escalation oftentimes is most effective. I'm speaking in generalizations, which I don't like to do, but there's no other way for me to communicate that right now. When there's some type of a conflict. So for example, if you accidentally spill somebody's beer at the bar, or there's a fender bender, right? Or someone thinks you're hitting on their girl or something. There's a conflict there, a conflict of interest. And you're like, or a conflict of ego or position in the status of the social status, where you're like, hey, look, bro, I don't want any trouble. Listen, next round's on me. It's all good. I didn't mean to spill your beer. Listen, I accidentally, it was my fault. A little fender bender there. My insurance company's on the way. I'm staying in my car, right? It's all good. I get it. My bad, right? Sorry, I didn't know that was your girl. My bad. I didn't mean any disrespect. That would be a form of de-escalation that's happening while there's a misunderstanding or some type of conflict. But if someone has made up their mind that they're going to use violence to get what they want or to do what they're going to do, oftentimes what's known as de-escalation in the self-defense world can actually attract more aggression and more violence. On the other hand, puffing yourself up and making you the big badass alpha, and real alphas don't do that, right? Real alphas don't have to announce that they're the alpha. They don't have to pose that they're the alpha, by the way. That can attract more aggression too, because now alpha wants to take on alpha to be the top. And you have to be submissive or whatever either. Careful, because your body language, that's really going to send the biggest message. 93% of communication is nonverbal. So I like to recommend that people keep those things in mind when it comes to self-defense.
Yeah, that's a huge thing. And I think another thing too, Todd, is a lot of people get the idea of what self-defense and street fighting is. I think for me, they're two different things.
Yes.
What would you say the biggest difference is?
Would you like me to comment on that?
Absolutely. I would love to hear how you put it.
I think it's true sort of across I think that's a big misunderstanding in general in the firearms training world and self-defense world and martial arts world, firearms world especially. I think people have this idea that they're preparing for a duel. for a mute, right? Where there's symmetry, where you're both mutually entering into this fight, right? It's a duel at high noon where you're going to step outside and you're going to have a street fight. Someone talks shit and you're going to, you're going to stand your ground and you're going to that, and right. And that's now you're going to do that, or you're going to shoot it out. What the fuck you about, man? I tell my students, like, if I ever hear that you got into a fight, don't ever come back here. Don't ever step a foot back and want to come back, cancel your membership on the spot. You are not welcome back here if you ever get into a fight, because I'm not going to teach you these things if you get into a fight. If you have to defend yourself, if someone is imposing themselves on you and you have no other choice, you have no reasonable means of retreat, you can't talk yourself out of the situation, you're backed into a corner, you had no other choice. Now you got to switch into another gear, right? And that's why we train. Now you switch into another gear, or if someone ambushes you and they're on you and with an edge weapon or a blunt force weapon, or they drug, whatever the case may be, multiple attackers, that's different. Now you're switching into a gear that, but we still want to have a level of measure and skill at the same time. So one is symmetrical and one is asymmetrical. And symmetrical is a fight, or you're stepping into the octagon, you're stepping into the ring, you're stepping onto the mat, you're going to slap and bump, you're going to touch hands, and you're going to go, and there's going to be a referee and scoring and rules, or you're going to tap out. That's a fight. Or you're on the street and you want to save face, which is stupid. You're one lucky punch and one head bounce on the concrete from being a vegetable, or somebody else being a vegetable, and now you're going to prison for 5 years. Yeah. So those are some of the distinctive differences between a fight and what we call an attack. We prepare for attacks, to deal with attacks.
With regards to your training, I know you guys train a lot, like we were saying, retaining, not having to use the firearm unless it's last resort. You guys do a lot of training where, the firearm's pulled on you, and how to defend a firearm that's been put on you?
Yeah. The variables in that are, the spectrum of those variables is vast. Yeah. Is the contact direct? Is it indirect? What's the distance that they're at? Are bullets already flying at you? Is it an armed robbery where we strongly recommend that in most cases, not all, that we're not drawing on a drawn gun. Then a lot of it's going to depend on what the distance is, and do you have cover? Do you have concealment? You're actually a lot safer when you're closer to the firearm than you are farther away, unless you're outside of like 25 to 30 feet. You want to close that distance so you can get control over that weapon. And then that's counterintuitive. And actually firearms are, for most bad guys, like they've got what they've wanted over and over again by using a firearm, because everyone just submits because they believe like they have this magic power and everyone's going to die. And and really firearms are dangerous from the muzzle forward. And so they can be very vulnerable if they aren't used correctly. And most people don't know how. Now, do I recommend that people automatically fight back at close distance? No, I recommend you have a lot of training and a lot of practice, a lot of experience. And even then, only do it if it's sort of a do or die situation and you have no other option but to take that weapon away from somebody or fight them. But drawing on a drawn gun is not ideal. There are other things that we do that we call ruses, where we delay and obscure if we realize we need to take action. So say, for example, somebody draws a firearm on us and they have the advantage of having a lethal weapon at distance. And they're saying, they're commanding that we go to a secondary location, get in the car, get in the trunk, get in the back room. We know we don't go to secondary locations. It's that simple. We know what happens in secondary locations, or someone will be turned out into some type of human trafficking. Yeah. So we're better off fighting and dying right there on the spot. And there's ways that we can delay and obscure. We know that there are usually opportunities that come about during those situations, and there are ways that we can create opportunities if we're faced with a situation like that. I have to be able to lead people through how to utilize those strategies.
With regards to that, you actually touched on something, and this is just strictly for my own, to pick your brain, because I respect what you do. Mm-hmm. When it comes to self-defense, I look personally, when I teach it, I look at three main pillars, and that is, do I need to get out of where I am? Do I need to stay where I am? And am I defending somebody else? because each three things, like I'm not
Yes.
going to remember 1,001 techniques, right? But because the way I look at it with regards to self-defense and combative arts, it's objective. What is my fucking objective? Because if I can understand what my objective is under duress, my body and everything else will kind of follow because it's going towards that goal. Because if do I want to escape from here? Somebody trying to abduct me, how do I fucking hold my ground? And now how do I fight defending somebody? Do you guys ever do any work with firearms where you're kind of like bodyguarding somebody?
Yeah. So I don't know if you know this, Mark, but I'm also an executive protection agent. I have a background actually, there's a difference between a bodyguard and an executive protection agent. Bodyguard is usually a big dumb bad guy who protects the good guys. You know what I mean? And an executive protection agent is more like a Secret Service agent who there's a lot of other aspects to their job outside of the kinetic side of it. And so I've actually designed a program a big part of it. I've actually designed a program that we teach where we take the principles of executive protection and we apply it to families and individuals, because there's a lot of executive protection that does not apply to regular people at all in many ways. And so, yes, we have very clear strategies. In fact, it's harder for someone to defend their family than it is for an executive protection agent to protect somebody who's a high profile principal who they know have threats against their life, because they know who the target is, right? And they know basically how they're not exclusively, but they have a pretty good idea of how they're going to respond, and they're usually on a team with other people too. Whereas for us as regular people, we don't know who the target is. The target could be our wife, the target could be our children, the target could be us. So decision making is far more complex for us. We're usually casually in public place, or usually executive protection stuff. They're not always casually in a public place. They're usually going through transitional spaces from a vehicle to another place, like a restaurant or a place where a meeting is going to take place. Not always, but that's usually what it is. So it's far more complex for us, and we don't know how our family members are going to respond. We can talk with them about it, we can practice it with them, but their responses are going to be almost 100% unpredictable with what they're going to do. So there are strategies and there are methods, however, that we can take that really can increase our chances of positive outcomes. And there are ways that we can really take away the opportunities for would-be threats. And that's, again, for me to even introduce it, there would be like 10 hours a day for about 4 days, right?
This is one of the things that people are like, oh, I'm not scared. Like, no, I have a lot of fear. My fears involve my children's safety. And one of the things that I think about it. Like maybe I think about it too much, but I think about it. I always look around my house. I make sure I have something in every room that I can get to. I tell my kids, and if something happens and daddy tells you this is where you go, this is how you hide, this is where mommy goes. I tell my wife, and I try to do it without scaring my children and like have them feeling there's this impending doom coming. But I worry about that. Like even the way I have my mirrors when I come down the stairs, my mirrors are set up on the wall so I can see around the corner, because I think it's so important to be prepared for that. And when it comes to like home invasions and stuff like this, I know the laws here in Canada are much more different than in the US, but I would imagine that a lot of people that come to seek your help are probably looking at these kind of scenarios too, if I'm not mistaken. Like how do you go about training somebody to like intelligently defend themselves in the home?
It's not as intuitive as most people will think, and there's a lot of stuff out there in social media that's really and in the training world that's really misleading about it. One, I have to be intellectually honest about it and say that in terms of violent crime, the majority of the violent crime that's going to happen inside the home is going to come from another family member or somebody that you know. So there's that.
Wow, really?
There's a very extremely small percentage of violent crime that actually is a home invasion style of attack.
So it's more like domestic.
And most people go ahead, Mark.
Is it more like a domestic dispute that the violence is like?
Yeah,
that makes sense.
There are other things too. Family members that even don't live in the home that have mental illnesses or have substance abuse problems, or disgruntled for some reason. That's where the majority of it comes. But if not, the small percent actually we don't know who are home invasions. You need to know. We know that. What gets confusing is that draw upon these fears that people have, and they like the majority of these violent crimes are going to be happening inside the home, and so you need to know CQB. You need to know how to search your home with your weapon, right? You need to know how to do all this cool tactical stuff, and you got to get all kitted up, and you have to, hut. And I know high-speed operators who work in teams who will not search their home, even with another buddy who's on their team, because they know how many danger zones there are. Like, that is a shit sandwich. It's very difficult to do something like that. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it or you shouldn't know it. If you have to go, we call take the space, another part of the home where another family member is in danger or they're being harmed, and you're going in no matter what, you should know how to handle that if that's the case. But that's extremely rare, and you should know that is extremely dangerous, and that's a situation where you are willing to put your life in extreme danger, where the stakes are extremely high in order to do that. That is not a high priority. We need to also know that if you do need to get to a weapon, you have an average of 2 seconds to do out bumpers and all that kind of stuff. That's probably not going to happen unless you have your weapon on at all times, no matter what that weapon might be. And you should also know there's probably going to be an intercept, meaning if you realize that happens right now, you're probably going to go where the threat is immediately. You're probably going to intercept them while your family is getting to a room that you've discussed that is a barricaded room of safety where they can barricade them and they can call 911 and yell commands while you're taking care of business. So what are we talking about again? Using what immediately during that intercept?
My personal.
We're going to need to have skills in dealing in confined spaces, up against walls, up against barriers, versus multiple attackers when weapons are in play. That's probably where it's going to happen. I did a course on the PDN network, and they asked me to do a course on self-defense or home defense. And I said, sure. And then when I presented my curriculum, they're like, what is this? Why would we do all this hands-on stuff? And then I explained it to them, like, what do you mean? How do you think this stuff looks?
Right.
And then they're like, oh, that makes sense. Do that. And so we that's what we did our course on. But again, we have an integration of these things and know how these things they're going to happen rapidly and violently and when and how you least expect it.
I guess that's why I see you doing a lot of wall work with Greg as well, right? To kind of simulate those kind of scenarios. Did you hear me? Can you hear me?
I lost your audio there for a second, Mark.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yep.
Can you hear me? Yeah. No, I was saying I noticed you.
Yep, I can hear you.
I've seen a lot of videos where you and Greg do a lot of wall work. Is that to simulate those types of scenarios?
Absolutely. And we actually have an entire course and curriculum built around that and carrying weapons concealed at the same time, because the strategies, there are similarities to MMA, but the strategy is very different. And there's nobody that knows more about wall work than Greg Nelson. Nobody anywhere. And so to be able to pick his brain and train with him on that and develop with that is really, really amazing.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that's what, between us, like I said, between your knowledge and his knowledge, and I see your posts when you're in the gym training it. I like seeing that. Sometimes there's no talking. There's just fucking push a button and roll. And I'll be sitting there, I'm doing something. I'm watching. I'm learning. I'm seeing what you're doing. It's important. Yeah.
We just go. Yep.
All right, man. Well, I'm gonna wrap this up, but
it's a big deal. Learning how to defend in confined spaces is I think it's more important. I'd like to see more of that than in the open space, to be honest with you. I think it's more important.
What about in cars and stuff like that? What does the data say about places like that, cars and stuff? Do you ever do anything with regards to that kind of environment where you're having to deal with somebody attacking you in that environment?
We have another course on that too, on that very topic, both armed and unarmed, and the principles are the same. The principles of the fighting are the principles of fighting. Like there's no special tech. I mean, there are ways that you can use, get the high position, and you can use the weapon or use the vehicle to pin weapons, depending on if you're inside the vehicle or outside of the vehicle and what's happening. But the principles of fighting are the principles of fighting. And we do that so we can pick up on little tricks and nuances for that very super specific context. But at the end of the day, understanding what fighting is what fighting is. That's why we say don't be a gunfighter, be a fighter with a gun. Understand the fight, and then you can apply it anywhere that you're at. But mostly just drive away. Keep your door locked, drive away, get out of there.
With this kind of like, I don't know, the states, you got people trying to take away. I mean, it's happened here, but they're trying to take away guns, trying to tell you guys who don't need guns. I know you've spoke up against that, and that's the other thing too. Not only are you in the industry, but you'll get up there and you'll speak on it, which I respect too. A lot of people don't fucking speak their minds nowadays. They're too scared to say something that's going to piss somebody off, How do you feel about, for me personally, this is a question I want to ask. They're talking about taking away guns and guns are a problem and this and that. Listen, there's always going to be a bad guy who's going to find some guy. Like taking away people's ability to get a license for a gun is not going to stop somebody who wants to kill somebody getting a gun. Do you feel like what you offer should be, or maybe later on would spill over into like schools where teachers would, they would have teachers or maybe vets who retired guarding schools, being armed, or teaching teachers how to deal with, maybe having some faculty, like they have a health and safety faculty, they'll have, a crisis intervention type of team where they'll get this kind of training.
Yeah. Another complex issue where there's a lot of interesting politics and dynamics that are involved with the school. I spent a lot of time doing that and attempting to do that with very little success. The teachers really aren't interested. They would rather stick their head in the sand and be in denial. And in my experience, schools and school administrators are more interested in the mitigation of liability than the preservation of life. They would rather put out lip service and half measure, put up a $6 million camera system so they can, observe what happened after people are killed, and teachers, I'm speaking in generalization here, I have a defender class where people who have it in their DNA to watch over the flock. We're a different breed. We can't not do it, Mark. You can't not do it. You were born to be protective of others. You were, am I right?
Absolutely.
There's no way that you can't do it.
I feel like we're a dying breed now, man. It's like I don't understand the logic of people who don't feel the need to do something or help somebody.
We're shamed and demonized for what we are because governments don't want us to. They don't want strong men. They don't want masculine and women. They don't want masculinity. It's a threat to them because we think for ourselves and we'll say, fuck you, we're not doing that shit. And try and make me do it. But, the teachers, and I'm speaking in general now, not all of them, of course, but most of those teachers are not. They're not sheepdogs. They're sheep. And that's not disparaging sheep. I'm saying they're more beta personalities, and they don't really have an interest in it, and they don't want to deal with it. Would rather be in this level of denial, this sort of cognitive, normalcy bias.
It makes no fucking sense.
But there are people out there, like you said, like zero, because children are sitting ducks and teachers are sitting ducks. And even the methodology that they will use, like it's really, well, in some ways it's almost designed to get more people killed. Really, like it's so dysfunctional that it's actually, I think it can actually create a kill with how things are done. There are people out there who would volunteer every damn day or go there as a job every damn day just to be there to secure and to be eyes on and be observers, and then to act as a deterrent to these types of mass casualty events. We'll call it that. And that would be highly effective and far less expensive than a $6 million video system, right?
Right.
And $100,000 of in-service training to talk to teachers about how these things work. They don't work. But you know, that's a very complex issue, because then people start to realize that they can become more self-reliant. They don't have to be reliant on governments to protect themselves, and the governments don't want that. Governments want, in general, most governments want people to be dependent upon them, and so it's a total conflict of interest. I think that like law enforcement, teachers need to seek this training out on their own.
Yeah. Do you think a lot of people,
and students, families,
do you get a lot of people giving you a hard time? Like, you know, what do you call them? Democrats over there? Is that like your guys' version of the liberal, right? Democrat? You get a lot of those people like giving you a hard time or talking shit about people. How do you address somebody who tells you that, you know, what we're doing is hateful or dangerous, or how do you deal with that?
Well, if they do really want to engage in a debate, I'm not the guy. Like, I know so much data. I know, like, this is what I do, man. You know, like, I have absolutely fucking handed them their fucking asses. Intellectuals who think they know because the media has trained them to have certain beliefs and opinions. I'm like, this is what I do, motherfucker. You know what I mean? You are barking up the wrong tree. But most of the time, I'm like, okay, whatever. I just sort of let it go. It's not worth it. You know, I do the best I can to really let the facts speak for themselves without getting into rhetoric. And, you know, also, like, just one thing that I'll say, like, I had one of them who challenged me once. You might find this interesting. Was a psychologist, and then, I was so that they had met their match, and I said, well, that's really, she used the word bloodthirsty, gun-loving conservatives. Literally, a psychologist said that to me, and I said, well, as a psychologist, you would probably know that a firearm is an inanimate object, and to assign human characteristics to an inanimate object is actually a psychological designation, a diagnosis known as anthropomorphism. It is a cognitive illusion and a delusion that human beings suffer from. So you would have to agree, as a psychologist, that to assign human characteristics to an inanimate object is not rational, and that you are suffering from a delusion, right? And that you are formally diagnosing yourself right here on the spot.
Mic drop.
Right? It's why have a, but it didn't, it's sort of like, I had some fun with it, right? But it's have make rational.
Yeah.
You can't do it. If they don't want to see it, they're not going to see it. Even if they're, and she wouldn't go there, no matter how right I was. They cannot.
That's why I think
the reality.
That's why I think education. That's why I think educating yourself is important, because you can't force somebody to agree with you or flip. But if you are educated enough to lead them through a series of questions, that they will come to the realization that they're wrong.
Hey, Mark, would you mind backing up? I lost your audio there for about 5 seconds.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I think so.
What I was saying is, that's why it's so important that people need to educate themselves, because you cannot change people's minds by telling them. They have to come to it on their own terms. And if you can lead them through questions till they arrive at the conclusion and say, oh, fuck, I was wrong, then you have a chance. But that's why most of these people, they don't want to hear you to listen. They just want to hear you so that they can just blah, 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 their bullshit.
That's right. They want to confirm their own bias.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a moral objectivist. To me, what's right is right, and what is, you know, there are objective truths. I don't know if did you ever see the interview where I was ambushed by the Miami news crew at the NRA convention, and I totally turned the tables on them, and I used the anthropomorphic on them, and I talked about that there is such a thing as moral objectivity and reality. And he's like, well, as it pertains to guns, you can find it online. I'm like, as it pertains to everything,
What would it be? What would it be?
Cup in my hand. I'm like, as with this cup. I'm like, if you asked me to go to the top of that building and jump off, we're going to have flat arms and have it be something else. There are objective truths in this reality, man. Like, and you can't get your way around it. Yes, firearms can be used for good, right? And yes, 100%. Firearms can be used for bad. But I actually said this to him. I asked him the question. I said, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but the CDC, which is an anti-gun organization, every year does a study. And every year the results show that I asked him this question, like, do you know how many cases every year in the United States where a firearm is used by regular people, not law enforcement or military or security operators? How many cases are reported annually where a firearm is used to stop, mitigate, or prevent a violent crime? I asked the reporter that question. How many are there? You're out here asking all these questions, these loaded questions. Now I'm asking you a question. How many does the CDC happen every year?
What was the response?
If you were to guess, Mark, how many would you guess? How many would you guess of those cases occur? Best guess.
Hundreds. 200, 300.
Like, yeah. Are you ready?
Yeah.
2.3 million.
Holy shit. But there's no light ever shined on it.
Still there?
Yeah.
I think I lost your
Can you hear me?
2.3 million. No.
And there's never any light shined on it.
And there's never any. So that's 5,000. That's 5,500 cases a day where average citizens use firearms to stop, prevent, or mitigate a violent crime. And check this out. The FBI thinks those numbers are actually much higher because most of them go unreported.
That's fucking crazy. What'd I say? A couple hundred, like a fucking idiot? Well, we don't live in America. That's crazy though, man.
It's that surprising. Yeah. And the research shows that the more firearms that there are in the hands of good people, that the violent crime rate drops dramatically.
Of course. Because of people.
That's empirical research. Yeah.
You know, like if you walk around Texas or you walk around where people have open carry.
The research shows that.
Can you hear me? There's some type of delay where we're not hearing the other people.
Yeah, the biggest fear that violent criminals have will have a firearm.
Oh, it's crazy. Now these people are also.
I got really shitty internet here, probably on my end. Yeah, but the biggest fear. Can you hear me okay now, Mark?
Yeah.
Sometimes it just has to kind of catch up. Sound check 1 2. Sound check 1 2. Sound check 1 2. Can you hear me?
Yep.
The biggest fear that violent criminals have is that people will fight back, and they'll fight back with a firearm. And there's research that shows that when a jurisdiction goes from being a gun-free zone to issuing concealed carry permits, that the violent crime rate literally drops 20% the day that law was issued, immediately. So the crime rate will do this. CCW laws are passed, violent crime rate drops 20% the next day.
Holy shit.
Yeah. And, you hear me say I was a psychotherapist and I specialized in trauma. And I'll never forget the stories that I heard where people would say to me, all I could think about is I desperately wish I had a gun. And they were some of them, not all of them. Some of them were anti-gun before that. I will never forget that. They're like, if only I'm lucky I'm alive. All I could think about was how I desperately wish I had a firearm. And that has stuck with me ever since. So I don't go anywhere without it.
You're allowed to have open carry in your state? Can you hear me?
Sorry, Mark, I lost your audio again in the lag. Yeah, go ahead.
I said, do you have open carry where the state where you're in?
We can carry open where in Minnesota, where I'm at. We can carry open if we have a permit to carry.
How
But if
hard
you
is it
don't
to
have a
acquire
permit
that?
to carry, it's an 8-hour course that we have to take, and there's a proficiency live fire proficiency shooting test that has to take place in order for us to get it. And then there's a deep background check that occurs also. It takes about 30 days after you've turned in your application to receive your permit.
Is there any like psychological evaluation that's done?
There's not a psychological evaluation, but if you have a history of mental illness, if you have been on a hold for mental illness to try to if you tried to harm yourself or anybody else, that will show up in their background search.
Really?
So it's both mental health and criminal background check. Yeah.
All right, Todd. Well, listen, brother, I really appreciate you for taking the time to do this. There's so much to learn. I'm definitely going to have you back on here again if you're up for it. And can you just let anybody know who's interested
Anytime,
in
man.
online
I'd be happy to come on.
Where can people find your online?
Yeah. First, let me say, Mark, take me up on my offer and come here for a visit.
Man, I'll do it. Trust me, I'll do it. I'll do it. I don't know what the laws are right now with crossing the border because with the vaccine and all that shit, I'd have to look into that. That's the only thing that stopped me from traveling. I haven't traveled since then because I don't know what the laws are. But if that's all good to go, I don't got to worry about that bullshit, man, I'll come out for a visit, no problem.
Anytime, man. Take me up on it. I'm serious. Don't be shy.
Yeah, me too. Where can people find your online content if they want to train, follow you, buy your material? Where can they find it?
Thank you. Well, we have a website that people can train at home. They can train our curriculum at home. We're adding to it all the time. It's very in-depth, really cool approach to training that's never really been done before. I think people would really like it. And the name of that website is idscitizendefender.com. Like, once again, idscitizendefender.com. If you're an instructor who's interested in becoming an instructor or learning more about what we do there, the website is. And I'd be honored if you guys checked out Integrative Defense Strategies on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram, on BitChute, on Rumble. We're putting out free content, training content, and videos all the time. We can to bring people up to speed what the latest and most effective training methodologies are out there, so we can help make the world a better and safer place.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Todd. I appreciate what you do for everyone and how much you take seriously.
Same, brother. I appreciate you.
And God bless, brother. I'll talk to you soon.
God bless, Mark. Thanks, buddy.